Hi, my name is Robert Chelle with Chelle Law, and I'm an attorney that assists veterinary associates with employment contract and independent contractor agreement issues. Today I'm going to talk about veterinary independent contractor agreements. So when I'm reviewing a contract for a veterinary associate and they've been offered an independent contractor position, what are some red flag things to think about, and then identifying any major problem areas. So first, just the main difference between a 1099 independent contractor and a W-2 employee. As an employee, you'll receive a W-2 at the end of the year. Taxes will be taken out of any of your compensation, generally receive benefits, whereas as an independent contractor, at least kind of the reasoning behind it would be it's something on a part-time basis. Maybe you're doing some relief work or filling in. You have more control over your schedule. But as an independent contractor, you're going to have almost no benefits. Maybe they'll pay for your malpractice insurance, and you won't get a base salary. You'll either get an hourly rate or a daily rate, or perhaps a percentage of collections. So why would an employer or an organization, determine someone is a 1099 versus a W-2? Well, as I said before, schedule plays a big part in that. If you're only working once a week, a few times a month, it doesn't really make sense to be an employee, whereas an independent contractor makes a little more sense in that scenario. But what I find is that some employers will misclassify a veterinary associate on purpose, simply to avoid having to pay employment tax. As an employee, the employer has to pay employment tax, which is, this is a generalization, somewhere between 8 to 12%, depending upon what state you're in, of whatever your compensation is. And so some clinics will just determine that someone is going to be a 1099 just so they can get out of paying employment tax. The IRS has published like a 20-factor test that goes over all of the things that could make someone either an employee versus an independent contractor. Do they have complete control of your schedule? Do they tell you when to work and where to work and who to work with? Basically, if they have all of the components of an employer, but they're just saying, well, we're going to pay you as an independent contractor, that may not pass the sniff test. So what happens if the IRS or the state does some kind of audit and then determines that the 1099 is actually a W-2? Well, someone will be responsible for the back taxes. There may be some fines and penalties associated with it. So the one thing you want to be absolutely certain of as a veterinary associate under an independent contractor agreement is that there isn't language that shifts all of the blame, all of the responsibility, all of the liability onto the veterinary associate in a circumstance like that. I've seen it plenty of times where they'll say, if veterinary associate is reclassified as an independent contractor or from an independent contractor to an employee, that they will be responsible for all of the things that I just said, the back taxes, the fees, penalties, all that kind of stuff. So you want to make absolutely certain there isn't language in the contract that shifts that responsibility onto you. Ideally, it would be the opposite. The employer or the organization would be the one responsible for those things. Mostly because 99.9% of the time, it's the organization that's determining whether you're an employee or an independent contractor. Most of the time, the veterinarian doesn't have the choice of which one to choose. So in that scenario, it doesn't make sense that the veterinarian should be the one who's responsible for all of those things. Two other things. One, malpractice insurance, as I said before. This is really the only kind of benefit that an organization would pay for if someone is actually working as an independent contractor. I mean, in the veterinary industry, it's relatively inexpensive, so it's not that big of a deal. But if they go through the AVMA PLIT, they use an occurrence-based coverage, so no tail insurance will be necessary. And then, as I said before, as a 1099, you'll be responsible for all of the taxes. So you want to make certain that you're budgeting for that, either submitting quarterly or obviously annual true-ups at the end of the year, so that you're making certain you don't have any tax liability beyond what you should owe. Do I think one's better than the other? I mean, it's purely based on circumstance and what your actual duties are for the organization. As I said before, as a relief vet, it makes absolute sense that you work as a 1099 and you're not like an employee. Whereas if you're working a full-time schedule and you're working 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, you're not working anywhere else, then it's almost assuredly that you're an employee and shouldn't be classified as an independent contractor. All right, that's a little bit about being an independent contractor as a veterinarian. If you have any questions about your employment agreement or independent contractor agreement, feel free to contact my law firm at the information listed below in the description. And I appreciate you watching the video. All right, thanks.